Aden, December 1963. A British Army patrol moves cautiously through the narrow streets of Crater District, one of the most dangerous areas in the colony. The lead vehicle is an Alvis Saladin armored car, its turret traversing slowly as the commander scans rooftops for snipers. Suddenly, insurgents open fire from multiple positions. Rifle rounds spark off the Saladin's armor harmlessly. The turret spins, the 76mm gun elevates, and a high explosive round demolishes the sniper position in a building's upper floor. The .30 caliber machine guns sweep other positions as the patrol extracts under fire. Not a single British soldier is wounded. The Saladin has just demonstrated why it became Britain's most successful armored car of the post-war era, fighting wars the public barely remembers in places most people couldn't find on a map. What that patrol experienced was the Alvis Saladin, a vehicle designed not for the massive tank battles of World War II, but for the brushfire wars, colonial emergencies, and counter-insurgency operations that defined Britain's retreat from empire. Between 1958 and the 1990s, Saladins fought in Aden, Cyprus, Northern Ireland, Kuwait, Oman, and across Africa. It wasn't designed to fight Soviet tanks. It was designed to dominate insurgents, survive ambushes, and project British authority in hostile territory. At that mission, it excelled for 4 decades. The problem facing Britain in the early 1950s was the realization that the next war wouldn't necessarily be a conventional conflict in Europe. British forces were fighting communist insurgents in Malaya, dealing with Mau Mau rebels in Kenya, and facing nationalist movements across the shrinking empire. These conflicts required mobility, protection, and firepower in a package suitable for colonial policing and low-intensity warfare. Traditional tanks were too heavy, too expensive, and too provocative for these operations. What Britain needed was an armored vehicle that could operate on poor roads, survive small arms and RPG fire, mount enough firepower to suppress insurgents, and maintain itself in austere conditions far from major depots. Existing armored cars were inadequate for Britain's evolving requirements. The Daimler armored car from World War II was obsolete by the 1950s, with thin armor and a small 2-pounder gun. The AEC armored car was better armed but mechanically unreliable and awkward to maintain. Both designs reflected wartime thinking about reconnaissance rather than the counterinsurgency role Britain now needed. The Ferret Scout car, entering service simultaneously with the Saladin, was too lightly armed for anything beyond reconnaissance. What British forces needed was something between a scout car and a light tank, combining mobility, protection, and a proper anti-vehicle and anti-structure weapon. The designer was Alvis Limited of Coventry, a company with extensive experience in armored vehicle production. The design team, led by Alvis engineers through the early 1950s, worked to the British Army's specification for a heavy armored car that could operate independently or support lighter reconnaissance vehicles. The requirement emphasized mechanical reliability, mine protection, amphibious capability, and a turret-mounted gun powerful enough to engage light armor and fortified positions. Development proceeded through the early 1950s with prototype testing beginning in 1954. The design incorporated lessons from World War II and recent colonial conflicts. The 6-wheeled configuration provided excellent cross-country mobility while maintaining road speed. All 6 wheels were driven, providing superior traction in difficult terrain. The hull was welded steel armor, angled for maximum protection. The engine was rear-mounted, providing frontal protection and simplifying maintenance. The turret design reflected the Saladin's dual-purpose role. The main armament was a 76mm L5A1 gun, essentially the same weapon used on the Centurion tank in its early marks. This gun could fire high explosive rounds against structures and personnel, armor-piercing rounds against light vehicles, and smoke rounds for screening. Effective range reached 1,000 yards, though the Saladin's fire control system was basic, limiting accuracy beyond 600 yards. The gun could penetrate approximately 80 millimeters of armor at 500 yards, adequate against Soviet BTR-60 armored personnel carriers and similar vehicles, but insufficient against main battle tanks. Secondary armament included 2.30 caliber Browning machine guns, one coaxial with the main gun, one mounted on the turret roof for the commander. The machine guns provided suppressive fire against infantry and could engage light vehicles. Ammunition capacity was 43 rounds of 76 millimeter ammunition and 2,750 rounds of .30 caliber. The crew was 3, commander, gunner, and driver. The fighting compartment was cramped but functional, with the commander and gunner in the turret and the driver in the front hull. Physical specifications revealed a substantial vehicle. Overall length was 16 feet 2 inches. Height was 7 feet 9 inches. Width was 8 feet 4 inches. Combat weight reached 11.6 tons, heavy for a wheeled vehicle, but manageable for the 6-wheel configuration. The engine was a Rolls-Royce B80 Mark VI A 8-cylinder petrol engine producing 170 horsepower. Maximum road speed was 45 miles per hour, impressive for an armored vehicle. Range was approximately 250 miles on roads. The armor was 32 millimeters maximum on the frontal arc, 16 millimeters on the sides, 8 millimeters on the hull bottom with additional mine protection plates. The 6-wheel drive configuration was critical to the Saladin's success. All 6 wheels were powered, providing excellent traction in sand, mud, and rough terrain. The suspension used coil springs, giving a relatively comfortable ride compared to tracked vehicles. The vehicle was amphibious with preparation, able to ford rivers and cross water obstacles using a propeller mounted under the hull. Maximum water speed was 6 miles per hour, slow but adequate for tactical crossings. Production began in 1958 at Alvis's Coventry facility. The British Army ordered approximately 1,200 Saladins, with production continuing through 1972. Export orders significantly exceeded British procurement. Countries including Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Nigeria, Portugal, Sri Lanka, Sudan, and others purchased Saladins, with total production reaching approximately 1,500 vehicles. The export success reflected the Saladin's suitability for nations needing effective armored vehicles without the cost and complexity of main battle tanks. The first combat use came in British colonial conflicts during the late 1950s and 1960s. Cyprus saw Saladins deployed during the Insurgency, where the combination of mobility and firepower proved effective in mountainous terrain. Aden became the Saladin's defining conflict. From 1963 to 1967, British forces used Saladins extensively in urban counter-insurgency operations. The vehicle's armor protected crews from small arms and grenades common in urban ambushes. The 76 millimeter gun could demolish buildings harboring snipers or destroy vehicles used in attacks. The most intense Saladin combat occurred during the 1967 withdrawal from Aden. British forces fighting their way to the port faced sustained ambushes and attacks. Saladins formed the armored core of convoys, their firepower suppressing insurgent positions while their armor protected vulnerable personnel. Not a single Saladin was lost to enemy action during the Aden withdrawal, though several suffered damage from RPG hits and mines. Northern Ireland from 1969 onwards saw limited Saladin use. The vehicles were too heavily armed for routine patrol work, where the Saracen armored personnel carrier and later Saxon were more appropriate. But Saladins deployed during major operations and provided fire support during intense rioting. The sight of a Saladin's 76mm gun barrel was often sufficient to deter escalation. Export users saw extensive combat. Jordanian Saladins fought in the 1967 Six-Day War against Israel, suffering heavy losses to Israeli armor and air attacks, but acquitting themselves reasonably well in the infantry support role. Nigerian Saladins saw action during the Biafran War from 1967 to 1970. Portuguese forces used Saladins in colonial wars in Angola and Mozambique. Kuwaiti Saladins faced Iraqi forces during the 1990 invasion, where they were hopelessly outmatched by Iraqi T-72 tanks, but fought delaying actions. For comparison, Soviet bloc forces used the BRDM-2 and BTR-60 in similar roles. Both were amphibious and well armed, but neither matched the Saladin's firepower or armor protection. The French Panhard AML was lighter and faster, but carried only a 90mm gun with limited ammunition. The American M8 Greyhound was obsolete by the 1960s. The Saladin occupied a unique niche, heavier and more powerful than scout cars, more mobile and versatile than light tanks. But crews experienced significant limitations. The petrol engine was a fire hazard when hit. Modern RPGs could penetrate the armor at close range. The lack of night vision equipment hampered operations in darkness. The basic fire control system made moving engagements difficult. The cramped interior caused crew fatigue during extended operations. Maintenance in tropical climates was challenging, with the Rolls-Royce engine requiring skilled mechanics and quality lubricants often unavailable in austere locations. The Saladin's retirement from British service began in the 1970s as the Scorpion family of tracked reconnaissance vehicles entered service. By the 1980s, most Saladins had been withdrawn, though some remained in training use into the early 1990s. Export users continued operating Saladins much longer. Some African and Middle Eastern countries used Saladins into the 2000s, testament to the vehicle's robust construction and reliability. Surviving examples exist in museums worldwide. The Bovington Tank Museum, the Imperial War Museum Duxford, and numerous regimental museums hold Saladins. Many former military vehicles entered private collections, with prices ranging from £15,000 to £40,000 depending on condition. The vehicle's relatively simple mechanics and parts availability make restoration feasible for enthusiasts. The legacy influenced British armored vehicle development. The Scimitar and Scorpion light tanks adopted the Saladin's philosophy of mobility and firepower in a package suitable for deployment anywhere in the world. Modern British doctrine still emphasizes wheeled armored vehicles for certain roles, following principles the Saladin established. Aden, December 1963. The Saladin reverses from the ambush, its armor scarred by bullet impacts but penetrated by none. The crew is intact. The mission continues. The Alvis Saladin proved what British military planners understood about post-colonial warfare. The next conflict wouldn't be massed tank battles in Germany, but ambushes in dusty streets, patrols through hostile villages, and showing force in places where authority was contested. The Saladin excelled at these missions for 4 decades, fighting wars that never made headlines, in places most British citizens couldn't locate, protecting soldiers in conflicts the public wanted to forget. Not the most powerful armored vehicle, not the most sophisticated, but the right vehicle for the wars Britain actually fought after 1945. And sometimes, being right for the actual mission